What if the escalating tensions between Israel and Iran aren't just political but part of a 2,500-year-old prophecy coming to life? In Ezekiel 38-39, ancient texts speak of alliances, invasions, and divine intervention, events that eerily echo today's headlines. Is this coincidence, destiny, or something far greater? Prepare to question everything you thought you knew about prophecy, geopolitics, and divine plans. Stay tuned as we uncover the shocking parallels. Is prophecy shaping history? Comment below now.
Ever get that feeling like the news is a little too much? Like
Yeah.
almost unbelievable?
Yeah, definitely.
Well, imagine finding predictions from like 2,500 years ago that kind of match up with what's going on today.
Whoa, that'd be wild.
That's what's so crazy about this whole Ezekiel 38-39 prophecy thing in the Bible.
Right, the one about a future conflict with Israel.
Exactly, and get this, Persia is right there in the thick of it. And we all know Persia, that's, Iran today.
Yeah, that's so fascinating, the level of detail Ezekiel lays out in his vision. It's not just some vague warning about trouble brewing.
So, like, what kind of detail are we talking about?
Well, he talks about a whole coalition of nations led by this Gog of Magog figure.
Gog of Magog. Sounds intense. And who is this Gog guy exactly?
See, that's where things get really interesting and a little tricky. There's a lot of debate about who or what Gog of Magog actually represents.
So like some ancient supervillain.
Oh, maybe. Some people interpret it symbolically, like a representation of evil or chaos in general.
Okay, that makes sense. Like kind of catch-all bad guy. But what about this Magog part? Any clues there?
Some scholars connect Magog to a specific geographic location, possibly linking it to those ancient Scythian tribes.
Scythians. Remind me, who were they?
They were these nomadic warriors who roamed the steppes north of the Black Sea way back when.
Oh, right. So like present-day Russia and that whole area.
Yeah, exactly. And that's where this idea of Russia being a modern-day Magog comes from.
Okay, so we've got this prophecy with Persia, aka Iran, involved. And now maybe Russia too, as this Magog. Starting to see why people are connecting this to what's going on in the world today. What about this regathered Israel, the prophecy mentions?
Oh, another piece of the puzzle.
So is that just talking about the modern state of Israel, established back in 1948?
That's how a lot of people see it, especially considering, for centuries, the Jewish people were scattered all over the place.
Right, the whole diaspora thing.
Exactly. So the founding of Israel in 48 could be seen as fulfilling that whole return to their ancestral land idea.
Makes sense. But is that the only way to interpret regathered Israel?
Not necessarily. Some scholars take a more spiritual approach.
Spiritual?
Yeah, like it's not just about physically being back in the land, but also about the Jewish people being united in their faith and their purpose.
Okay, so depending on how you define those terms, the prophecy could have some pretty different meanings, right?
Yeah.
But no matter how you interpret it, it's pretty wild that Ezekiel specifically named Persia, Iran, as part of this anti-Israel coalition. And when you look at the current relationship between those two countries, well, the parallels are kind of hard to ignore.
Yeah, no doubt about it. The relationship between Israel and Iran has been tense, to say the least, especially since the revolution in Iran back in '79.
Right, everything changed after that, huh?
Big time. Before the revolution, under the Shah, things were actually pretty good between Iran and Israel.
Really? Like they were buddies?
Well, not buddies, but definitely more cooperative. They had economic ties, even some military cooperation.
Huh, interesting.
But then came the revolution, and Ayatollah Khomeini took over. His whole ideology, it basically saw Israel as like a Western puppet, this illegitimate presence in the Muslim world.
So it wasn't just tough talk. Iran, under Khomeini, really started backing groups that were actively opposing Israel.
Oh, absolutely. Groups like Hezbollah and Hamas, considered terrorist organizations by Israel and many Western countries.
Yeah, which is a huge point of contention, obviously. And it's been going on for decades. Makes that whole existential threat thing feel pretty real for Israel. So we've got this ancient prophecy about Persia attacking Israel, and now, fast forward to today, we've got this very real tension and conflict between Iran and Israel. Can totally see why people would say, hey, this prophecy is happening right now.
It's a compelling case, for sure, especially when you consider how drastically things changed after '79. Before that, you wouldn't have looked at Iran and Israel and thought, yeah, this is how that prophecy is going down. But then the shift happened, and the tension has only escalated since then.
Definitely adds weight to the argument that maybe, just maybe, we're watching Ezekiel's vision play out in real time. But let's play devil's advocate for a sec.
Sure.
If we just ignore the prophecy for a minute and just focus on what's happening politically, isn't it possible that the whole Israel-Iran conflict could just be explained by, regular old modern politics?
Of course, you can't discount that. The Middle East is well, it's a complicated place, to put it mildly. Tons of competing interests, different groups vying for power. You've got the issues of land and resources, the struggle for regional dominance, and then you've got global superpowers meddling in everything.
Yeah, a real tangled web.
Exactly. But for those who really believe in the prophecy, all those political factors are, in a way, just the earthly mechanisms by which the prophecy is being fulfilled.
So it's like, for them, the prophecy isn't contradicting the political stuff. It's actually explaining it, giving it this deeper spiritual meaning.
Exactly. It's about seeing those political tensions, as real as they are, as part of a larger divinely ordained narrative.
And that brings up another element of the prophecy that can be tough to wrap your head around, especially if you don't come from a particularly religious perspective. I'm talking about this whole divine intervention thing. Ezekiel describes these attacking nations being taken down not by armies or anything, but by, well, supernatural events, earthquakes, fire, brimstone, the whole shebang.
Yeah, that's a tough one to reconcile with the way we think about warfare and international relations today.
Right. Like, how do you fit that into a modern understanding of the world?
Well, some people, those who maybe aren't so into the idea of divine intervention, might interpret those descriptions metaphorically. Yeah, like maybe it's not literal fire raining from the sky. Maybe it's a way of talking about the downfall of empires or the consequences of aggression, things like that.
So, like, the fire could be the horrible fallout from starting a war you can't win.
Exactly. But for those who take a more literal approach to the prophecy, those descriptions mean exactly what they say. God will step in, show his power, and make sure Israel comes out on top.
So we've got this ancient text, and people are interpreting it and applying it to what's happening in the world today in all these different ways. It shapes how they see the conflict itself, but also the role of, well, a higher power in everything that's going on.
It really highlights how powerful those religious beliefs and prophecies can be, even in a world that often claims to be secular.
That's a great point. So for some, Ezekiel's prophecy gives a whole other layer of meaning and purpose to what's happening right now, while for others, it raises a lot of questions. Questions about faith, about politics, and about how we're supposed to make sense of a world that often feels like it's teetering on the edge. But regardless of where you stand on the prophecy itself, what's happening in the Middle East definitely echoes those themes of conflict and the potential for things to go really, really wrong.
It definitely makes you stop and think, what if there are forces at work that we don't fully understand? Forces that are shaping history in ways we can only begin to grasp. It's interesting, when you really dig into Ezekiel's prophecy, it's not just about predicting some, future war. It's all tangled up with this idea of divine judgment and ultimately divine restoration too.
So it's not just about, like, who wins a battle, but about something much bigger, like a cosmic showdown or something.
Exactly. The prophecy suggests that this whole attack on Israel, it's a consequence of the nation's wickedness, the rebellion against God. It's like divine payback. But for those who see the prophecy from a more spiritual angle, there's also this message of hope and redemption woven in there too.
So even in the middle of all this terrifying conflict, there's a glimmer of something good.
Yeah. See, the prophecy doesn't just stop with Gog and Magog getting defeated. It goes on to describe what happens afterward. God cleanses the land, restores Israel to this position of power, and, well, basically sets up his kingdom on earth.
So the prophecy is as much about what happens after the fighting as the fighting itself.
Exactly. It's about the transformation that comes after the judgment, the rebuilding after the destruction. For those who believe, that's a powerful message, Even when things seem totally hopeless, there's always that chance for a fresh start, a chance for redemption.
That's a good point. People often focus on the doom and gloom of prophecy, but there's this whole other side to it that often gets overlooked. This idea that it's not just about some far-off future. It can actually impact how people live their lives right now.
100%. If you truly believe these prophecies are unfolding today, it's going to affect everything. Your worldview, what you prioritize, even your everyday choices.
So it's not just some abstract theological idea. It becomes a lens through which you see the whole world.
Exactly. For some, it might make them feel this sense of urgency, like they got to spread their faith, prepare for, the end times. For others, it might inspire them to work for social justice or peace, to try and lessen the suffering that the prophecy seems to predict.
So it's not just a prediction, it's almost like a call to action. Like, hey, this is how you need to live your life if you want to be on the right side of things.
I think that's a great way to put it. It definitely encourages a deeper connection to one's faith and a more conscious effort to live by its principles.
One thing that always gets me about Ezekiel's prophecy is just how detailed it is, especially when it comes to describing all the nations that attack Israel. We talked about Persia and Magog, but there's also Cush, Put, Gomer, Beth Togarmah, like a who's who of ancient civilizations.
It's amazing, isn't it? And of course, it's sparked a ton of speculation and debate about which modern-day countries those ancient names actually refer to. Some folks connect Cush and Put with parts of Africa, while Gomer and Beth Togarmah are often associated with areas in Turkey and Europe.
So the prophecy seems to be pointing to a truly global conflict, not just something happening in one corner of the world.
Totally. It's not just a regional squabble, it's something that affects the whole planet. And that brings up this interesting point about how geography and geopolitics play a role in how people interpret the prophecy.
How so?
Well, your understanding of where those ancient nations were located can lead you to very different conclusions about which countries today are fulfilling their roles in the prophecy.
So like, if you think Magog was somewhere in Central Asia, you might be looking at Kazakhstan or Uzbekistan as potential players in the conflict.
Exactly. And that just shows how important it is to understand the historical and geographical context. You can't just take those names at face value. You got to dig into the history, figure out where these civilizations were, what their relationships were like, and all that.
It's like being a historical detective, using clues from the past to try and understand what's going on in the present and maybe even get a glimpse of the future.
It's a fascinating process for sure. Requires a deep understanding of history, geography, even linguistics. But even with all that, there's always going to be room for different interpretations, different debates.
That's what makes these prophecies so captivating, I think. They're open to interpretation, they invite us to engage with them, wrestle with their meaning, and see how they apply to our understanding of the world.
And it's not even about finding the one right answer. It's about the journey of exploration, the discovery that comes from grappling with these ancient texts.
Okay, I want to switch gears for a minute and talk about something we touched on earlier, the psychological impact of Ezekiel's prophecy. Especially for people who believe it's happening right now, I imagine it must be this weird mix of like excitement and dread.
Definitely. It's kind of like knowing there's a massive earthquake coming, but you don't know when or how bad it's going to be. That kind of anticipation can be thrilling and terrifying all at the same time.
I can see that. On one hand, you might feel this sense of purpose, like, wow, I'm living through a pivotal moment in history. But on the other hand, you're probably freaking out about what's coming next.
Exactly, and that's where faith comes in. For those who believe the prophecy isn't all doom and gloom, it's also about God ultimately defeating evil and establishing his kingdom.
So like a silver lining amidst all the potential chaos.
Exactly, and that hope, that can be powerful. It can help counteract the anxiety and fear that comes with thinking about all the scary parts of the prophecy.
Like knowing that even if there's a storm coming, there's a safe harbor waiting on the other side.
That's a great way to put it. It really speaks to how faith can bring comfort and strength when things are uncertain, when there's potential danger ahead.
Now, for people who don't necessarily buy into the whole religious framework of Ezekiel's prophecy, there's still a lot to think about here, right?
Oh, absolutely. Even if you take away all the theology, the prophecy raises some fascinating questions about human nature, about how history seems to repeat itself, and about the potential for both, utter destruction and incredible renewal in the world.
It's like a cautionary tale about what happens when ambition runs wild, when greed and violence take over. It shows how humanity could destroy itself if we don't learn from our past mistakes.
It's a story that's been told over and over throughout history in different cultures, different ways, but those themes always seem to come through.
And it's definitely a story that still resonates today, maybe even more so with all the challenges we're facing. Climate change, political division, the threat of nuclear war, all that stuff.
Yeah, these are issues that force us to look at how fragile our world really is. We have to consider the potential for catastrophic consequences if we don't get our act together.
So even if you're not convinced about the literal fulfillment of Ezekiel's prophecy, it can still be a powerful reminder of the choices we have as a species and the potential for both darkness and light in the future we create.
That's a really important point. These ancient texts, even if you see them metaphorically or symbolically, they offer valuable insights into what it means to be human and the challenges we face as a global community.
Speaking of the global community, I'm curious about how different countries and cultures view Ezekiel's prophecy. We've mostly talked about Jewish and Christian interpretations, but I imagine it's seen differently in other parts of the world.
Absolutely. In some Muslim traditions, for example, there are prophecies about a final battle between good and evil that have similarities to Ezekiel's vision. But the details, the players involved, those are different.
So each culture has its own version of the story, its own way of understanding this cosmic battle between good and evil.
Exactly. And those differences in interpretation can influence how people see global conflicts and their own country's role in them.
So like if you believe your nation is meant to play a specific part in a prophecy, it could affect your government's foreign policy, even its willingness to negotiate or find peaceful solutions.
Right. It shows how complicated things are, how religious beliefs, geopolitics, and just our basic human need to make sense of the world, how all those things are intertwined.
It reminds us that these prophecies don't exist in a vacuum. They're woven into the fabric of our cultures, our belief systems, even our politics.
And that's why it's so important to understand the context in which these prophecies were written,
No.
how they've been interpreted throughout history, and how they continue to shape our thoughts and actions even today.
We've definitely covered a lot in our look at Ezekiel's prophecy. We've gone into its historical context, its theological meaning, and its potential impact on both individuals and whole nations.
And honestly, we've only scratched the surface. There's so much more to explore, so many layers of meaning to unpack.
But for now, we'll leave you with this. Whether you find Ezekiel's prophecy totally convincing, totally confusing, or maybe even a little unsettling, it definitely pushes us to engage with our own beliefs and those big questions it raises about faith, history, and the future of humanity. We've been digging into all the different ways people interpret Ezekiel's prophecy and how those interpretations can shape how we view what's happening in the world today. But I'm curious, about the impact of this prophecy on, politics. It seems like every time things heat up in the Middle East, Ezekiel 38:39 pops up in the conversation.
Yeah, it's definitely a recurring theme. It seems like whenever there's geopolitical uncertainty, especially when we're talking about Israel and its neighbors, people start bringing up Ezekiel. And it's not just, religious folks talking about it. It finds its way into think tanks, political speeches, even mainstream news coverage.
So how is it being used in those contexts? Is it like people are trying to use it to justify their political agendas or, make certain groups look bad?
Unfortunately, that does happen sometimes. The prophecy gets invoked to support a specific political stance, whether it's pushing for a strong military response or promoting a more isolationist foreign policy.
So instead of being this tool for understanding or even peacemaking, it becomes a way to, back up existing biases or rally people around a specific course of action.
Exactly. And that's where things can get a little risky when you start using prophecies from thousands of years ago to justify modern political decisions. You risk oversimplifying really complicated situations and ignoring all the nuances of, how countries interact with each other.
Yeah, it's like trying to force a square peg into a round hole.
Yeah.
You're taking something that was written in a specific historical and cultural context and trying to shoehorn it into a totally different situation. And that can have some pretty bad consequences.
Right. It's crucial to remember that the world Ezekiel was writing in was completely different from ours. The geopolitical landscape has shifted, the players have changed, and the way we fight wars has evolved dramatically. To try and apply the prophecy directly to today's events without considering all those changes, well, it's naive at best and, potentially dangerous at worst.
So if we want to approach Ezekiel's prophecy in a way that's, meaningful and responsible, especially when we're dealing with the complexities of the modern world, where do we even start?
I think it begins with acknowledging the limitations of prophecy. It's not some magic crystal ball that reveals the future with 100% accuracy. It's a text that was written in a specific time and place, and it reflects the beliefs and concerns of that era. We should approach it with humility, understanding that our interpretations are always going to be colored by our own cultural biases and our own perspectives on history.
So instead of treating it like a blueprint for the future, we should see it as something that encourages us to ask deeper questions about ourselves, about our place in the world, and about the forces that shape history, right?
Exactly. The prophecy can be a starting point for critical thinking, prompting us to examine our assumptions, our biases, and how we make sense of everything that's happening around us.
Now, as we wrap up our deep dive into Ezekiel 38:39, I want to bring it back to you, the listener. We've explored all these different interpretations, the historical context, the potential implications, but ultimately, the meaning you take away from it is, It's personal.
It really is. Whether you find the prophecy fascinating, confusing, or even a little scary, it's a challenge to really think about your own beliefs and those big questions it raises about faith, history, and, the future of humanity.
And as we've seen, it's not just about abstract theological ideas. These prophecies can impact how we see the world, the decisions we make, and how we treat each other.
So as you keep following what's happening in the Middle East and around the world, remember Ezekiel's prophecy. Not necessarily as a literal guide to the future, but as a way to think about the complexities of conflict, the power of belief, and the possibility for both destruction and renewal in, well, the story of humanity.
Well said. Thanks for joining us on this journey through Ezekiel's vision. It's been a journey that challenges us to face the mysteries of the world and, I guess, the mysteries within ourselves too. And who knows, maybe this journey is just beginning.
As we reach the end of this journey, one truth emerges. Ezekiel 38 to 39 is more than an ancient text. It's a riddle intertwined with today's headlines. From Israel's regathering to the rise of alliances eerily matching Persia and Magog, we've explored the prophecy's haunting relevance. Is this divine foresight, a lesson for faith, or pure coincidence? Reflect on the parallels we've uncovered, and ask yourself, are we living through prophecy, or is this human history repeating itself? The prophecy's themes of justice, rebellion, and divine sovereignty resonate across millennia. Whether you believe these ancient words predict modern geopolitics or symbolize eternal struggles, their impact is undeniable. The coalition against Israel mirrors today's alliances, yet God's intervention reminds us of forces greater than human power. Do you see this as proof of a divine narrative, or a coincidence shaped by interpretation? Let us know in the comments, and let the debate begin. Ezekiel's vivid imagery, armies like storms, fire from heaven, and a nation dwelling securely, captures both fear and hope. We've unraveled its complexities and tied them to today's Iran-Israel tensions, inviting you to think beyond the surface. Are these patterns divinely orchestrated or historical cycles reimagined? Share your perspective. If these connections have stirred your curiosity, don't forget to like this video, subscribe for more, and join our community of truth seekers. This prophecy isn't just about nations, it's about humanity. Ezekiel challenges us to consider our role in history. Are we agents of justice or rebellion? As the prophecy predicts restoration after judgment, it offers hope amid chaos. Can these lessons guide us in today's unpredictable world? Do you see parallels in your own life? Share your reflections and insights below. Together, let's unravel what these ancient words mean for us now. For Israel, Ezekiel's prophecy is both a warning and a promise. It reminds us of resilience in the face of overwhelming odds and the power of faith over fear. But for skeptics, it sparks questions. Could this be a self-fulfilling prophecy shaped by belief and action? For believers, it's a call to trust in divine sovereignty. What's your stance? Destiny, coincidence, or something else entirely? Join the discussion in the comments and let your voice be heard. As you reflect on the prophecy's dramatic conclusion, consider its ultimate message, restoration. From burning weapons to burying the past, Ezekiel paints a picture of renewal. What lessons can we take from this vision of healing after conflict? Whether on a global or personal scale, it challenges us to find hope and rebuild. How do you see this prophecy influencing our future? Comment below and add your thoughts to this ongoing conversation. Ezekiel 38 to 39 doesn't just look back or forward. It bridges time, linking ancient truths with modern challenges. Whether it's a literal prediction, symbolic wisdom, or an enigmatic riddle, its relevance endures. What's your interpretation? Are today's global tensions proof of prophecy or coincidences amplified by belief? Share your answers, subscribe to our channel, and like this video to stay part of this extraordinary exploration. Your insights matter as we uncover deeper truths together. Thank you for joining us on this profound journey into prophecy, geopolitics, and faith. If this video has sparked questions, insights, or even doubts, we want to hear from you. Let's keep this discussion alive. Like, share, and subscribe to be part of our next deep dive. And remember, the greatest mysteries are those that challenge us to think, feel, and seek truth. Are you ready to uncover more? Let's explore what's next, together.